if I could bring in Professor Rajen Pratap Gupta to give his opening statements and talk to us about how you think the world would be in 2050. We'll be delighted to hear your views, sir.
Thank you, Arpit, and I thank NV Poll for the wonderful, informative webinar, and Ishan for the pioneering initiative, and also for giving me this opportunity. I am a policy maker, so I look at policies from an intergenerational, you know, uh, I'll say perspective. So for me, definitely 2050 is important. But when I look at where are we headed in next century? Because environment is something that perpetually keeps hitting us. I think Wendy made a very interesting presentation, and after seeing that, I changed what I wanted to say. So I'm going to look at three perspectives. One is the population, second is consumerism, and the third is technical advancement. And let's look at what we will be as a population at the end of this century. It will be around 11 billion. And if you look at what is the planet's carrying capacity, we certainly need, as I think Wendy made it very clear, and I think Ishan also highlighted, clean air, water, clean energy. We will need more infrastructure, given the population that we will be headed into at 11 billion. We need more food, but the planet is not going to grow. That's a hard fact. Planet doesn't grow. So what is the planet's carrying capacity we need to figure? So there are three data sets that you prominently see. Out of that, 1.9 billion is what the multilateral bodies have said. Then you have 8 billion. Then you have 1024 billion too, which is wild, I guess. Can never get something that planet Earth can sustain. But if it is 1.9 billion, you can look at what population is happening, what is going on. So effectively, in the 22nd century, we should be having a population that we had in 18th century, 19th century, which is around 1 billion. So, and look at the growth. We grow 1 billion every 13 years. And if you look at the way we have doubled, we were doubling in 300 years, then 127 years down to 47. Imagine if in 48 years we double from 8 billion. I think Wendy has said, I think given us a very complete perspective. And look at the other side. When we say this planet doubles, let's go to some numbers, what it means. So typically, we look at the number of amount of land we have, 3.5 billion acres. 1.9 hectares of land is what a person needs to grow food, textiles, wood, absorbing waste. And if you look at the average land American has at the disposal, it's 9.7 acres, which means by that standard, we can support only 1.5 billion population. So the first dimension you see in getting where environment is taking us is population. Anything we see, we have to see in that perspective. And the second thing that I always look at is consumerism. World, instead of being I don't know what we should say, we should have probably called world as a family, but we made world as a market. We are totally driven by market forces. And the way we are consuming earth resources is 1.6 times than the sustainability rate. There is a very interesting perspective that I keep sharing when I talk about environment. It's called the Earth Overshoot Day. Now, Earth Overshoot Day is a very interesting perspective. It is what marks the date when the human demand for ecological resources and services in a given year exceeds what Earth can regenerate in that year. Last year, when I spoke at the Royal Academy Symposium, I was chair of the symposium. It was August 22. This year is July 29. I have looked at all the historical dates since 1970 when the data is available. It used to be December 30. That means in 70, our regenerable resources last year were full year, less one day. In 2000, it became September 22. That means effectively for every decade we pass through, it moves 1 month before. I guess in 2050, by April, we would have consumed the entire resources meant for a year. And if we look at the end of the century, when we start the new year, we would have done with it. Now, the second thing that comes to it is consumerism. Now, I think that is where the sustainable consumption comes into picture. And if you look at environment, that is something that we should focus on. And the third one, I think all of us are connected. I see people from almost every part of the world, and technology is making this happen. Now, the third one is the technological advancement. Thanks to advancement of technology, we can connect seamlessly, and talk to each other, learn from each other. But look at what this impact would be. So if we consider that, for every web search people do, 0.7 gram of carbon emissions are added. If you did from an efficient laptop, if you did from a power hungry laptop, it is 4.5 gram. For every email, we add 4 grams to carbon emission. If it is loaded with attachment, it's 50 grams. And 78% of the email are junk. Just imagine this. And we are adding 20 million tons of carbon emissions every year. Depends on which grid you are, you must be spending between 60 gram to 1060 gram per unit of electricity. And for 1 hour mobile, if you use, you add 1250 kilos of carbon emissions. And if you go a little further, 1 minute of mobile chatter results in 50 grams of carbon emissions. So just look at, when 2050, when we get in, what would happen. In just for this webinar for 1.5 hours, each one of us with a power efficient laptop is going to add 18 grams of carbon emission. So technological advancement for me is important. At the same time, we have to be very careful about what the carbon footprint of our activity is. So what I see is a big shift happening. What you said is transport adding to pollution, industries adding to pollution. It will be our digital interactions also adding to pollution. And it will be e-waste, which will be something that we got to address, whether we call it 2050 or we call it 2020. I think Wendy's presentation was fantastic in terms of we are already into that area, where we should be talking about, the change that we need. And if we look at what this data tells us, clear pointers are emerging. One is that we are living and consuming way beyond sustainable threshold already. We've already passed that. The world is transitioning, and I think transitioning very fast in 21st century. In digitized world, gadgets will be more in terms of waste production, in terms of technology to the environment. So we need to factor that. I think it's not just the overgrowing population. It is a market-based approach and consumerism which is adding fuel to fire. Something we'll have to plan and address. When I looked at last year, when I was chairing that symposium, when I looked at the data, we only have a decade. Now I think a year less, because last year we had decade to turn the needle back in time. So with 9 years left for us to do, I think all of us have to take actionables for now to see what we can do. And I think Ishan and NVPol is doing a phenomenal work in this area. I think those who are joining will understand that it's really gone to a serious issue. 2050 is far off. I don't know how many of us would be on the screen to talk about it then. Let's not behave like a irresponsible generation. But as Wendy said, there is a ray of light. We know that human species is resilient. We have seen in COVID how the world came together, and they bought out the vaccine, and things are getting to normal for the at least the rich, I would say, not so much for the LMIC countries. But I think there is a ray of hope. When we all get together, we should be able to turn the needle back in time. Thank you.
My question to the panel right now is that in terms of the immediate future, so let's say if we don't talk about 2050, where we are seeing so many catastrophic things happening, what if we think a little short term? What if we think, Professor Gupta's works with governments, and governments typically, have a 5-year to 10-year thought cycle. So what are some of the, changes, or what are some of the good and bad directions in which things are shaping up that you see in the next, let's say, 5 to 10 to 15 years, and what are some of the positive ones in terms of positive changes, positive policies that we can expect in the next 10 to 15 years? And you can talk about the world at large, or you could also talk about various regions such as India. So I don't know if Professor Gupta, do you want to jump onto this first?
Yes, thank you. And I think I would say that the best part that has happened is thanks to people like you who have brought the focus. Where everyone thinks that this is a major area. What difference do I make? I think you all make a big difference. As you said, even like 100 people came out of 450 registration. Even if one person plants a tree, you make a difference. So I think we don't have to wait for everyone to start together, each person can do. So let me, get to the point that you have specifically mentioned. So what I see as the biggest thing that happened is, right from the former US vice president to people who started attending to this issue early on, so a lot of focus was brought in, and I think the UN SDGs have talked about sustainable consumption. Though I think they should be very important, but there are a lot of things that also flow into as subsets. We always talk about the big goals. We also have to look at what are the smaller things that we can achieve. So the biggest commitment that has come is that people have come, join the race to aware people. I would say we need to go beyond awareness. We need to sensitize people. Let me give you an example to understand this. Typically, if you ask a diabetic to control his sugar, it will be tough. But the moment you tell that 32% of all diabetics end up having a chronic kidney disease, you will see the sensitization happening. So I think, yes, you need to get to sensitize people. Awareness beyond a point is not going to lead to results. Let me also give you the kind of commitments people have done. So you have Government of India saying we will reduce the emission intensity of GDP by 30 to 35% by 2030. We'll increase the forest cover to 33% by 2030, and will be 100% electronic vehicle nation by 2030. So countries have committed, whether to show globally that we mean what we are saying, or whether
Yeah.
it's exigency. But yes, there are large scale actions. But let me tell you, the biggest challenge, if you see, is human side. We still believe, since I am not impacted, so doesn't worry, this is all like big talk, doesn't happen, doesn't impact. So the biggest challenge is acceptance of the problem. We have still not understood the magnitude of the problem, though disasters have become the fifth season in most part of the world.
Yeah.
Look at India, how many times we have seen flooding, we have seen extreme weather. I think Wendy showed that slide. I think Ishi talked about it. So that we are always in denial mode. So we need to address from the behavioral standpoint. Governments can change system by making laws, but I believe more than laws, we need education, we need sensitization, and this means a partnership. I mean, I think people like you are best suited to drive that. A partnership between academia, civil society, and the industry. That's the kind of coalition we need, and they needs to go down to city and schools level. Unless we do that, it's going to be tough, and 2050 is not something we can afford to wait for.